Every writer knows that the best conversations about writing don't happen in classrooms or symposia or any other fancy artisanal setting. They happen at the bar, usually after deadline. That's the vibe we're going for here. This is The Other 51. I'm Dr. Brian Moritz. Today's guest is Dr. Andy Billings from the University of Alabama. Dr. Andy Billings, welcome to The Other 51. Thanks for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
And you'll apologize for any ambient noise that you hear. We're recording this in one of the beautiful lobby hallways of the Renaissance in downtown Washington. We're at the AEJMC annual conference here, where you are busy. You've got a lot of papers that you're a part of. How many do you have here? Do you remember?
I think 4.
Okay.
Yeah. A couple of them are connected to an IOC grant that we had about mobile media use in the Olympics, and I have some other things with spurs of book projects and things.
Excellent. And one of the things we're going to be talking about is book writing. You were a part of an excellent panel earlier this week on basically So You Want to Write a Book. I think that might have been the title of it. And you had some great advice in there that I wanted to get into. But before we get into that, just give a little bit of your background and how you got to the University of Alabama and what are some of the things you study?
I have kind of a roundabout way of getting at where I was at. So, I got my PhD at Indiana University. It was officially in comm and culture.
Okay.
When I started there, it was speech comm, and by the time I was done, I was the last person to ever use numbers to still graduate from comm and culture. But I had that side of telecom.
Okay.
And gradually over time, kind of my thing was to merge the speech comm and the mass comm sides in interesting ways to the point that you're applying this theory from one side to practice in another, and what seemed very natural to me might seem different to other people. And so I gradually migrated over to that. So then I spent 12 years at Clemson and started at Alabama in 2011, so I'm starting year 8.
Wow. And so, and you can talk about the research that you're presenting with your co-authors here, but what are the things about sports media that you're researching that you're interested in?
I am especially interested in how that has the ability to shape society, and especially how we take that beyond the world of sports.
Okay.
So how it impacts everything from what we value to how we talk about people of different genders, races, nationalities, to really inspirational media or what we find entertaining about that as opposed to fictional media or other narrative-driven things.
Okay. And so what are some of the things that you're specifically presenting on here? What are some of what's your current research?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we're trying to get out now, this next year is 4 or 5 projects related to that mobile media use in the Olympics. And it's really about that notion of, used to be when you said you're an Olympic fan, that meant you watched it on television. That's what you did. Maybe you read about it in the newspaper, but that was it. Now there's a difference between I watch the Olympics and I follow the Olympics, or I'm an Olympic fan. Those are different things because of different platforms. Mm-hmm. And so we're really trying to uncover how those are layered. Okay. Because it used to be we'd always say it was an either-or prospect. I either want to watch it on television or I want to do this on my phone or whatever it is. But really it's about doing things simultaneously. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to figure out, essentially for the IOC, their big question, since the majority of their money comes in from television contracts, what happens if Olympic media merges to other forms or other platforms that they aren't as easily able to monetize? Okay. What happens at that point? Okay. So is it enhancing or replacing television?
Right. So what are you finding? So I know it's early in the research, but what are you finding on that?
Well, the big thing is we've separated out second screen from social TV. Okay. So second screen often is second screen distracting, right? It is, I'm watching the Olympics, but I'm also playing a video game on the iPad, or I am checking messages from my friends on my phone, or whatever it is. And those are not things that we would consider enhancing the primary media product. So we've tried to really separate that out and focus more on social TV, which is that notion of TV's not giving me enough, or whatever you use is that passive screen, the consumption screen, right? Where we'll say, okay, that's giving me the entertainment, but I want interaction. That's giving me the entertainment, but I want information seeking. And we find about 25% of people in 6 different nations combined participate in something called social TV. Okay. So it's not necessarily that it's taking over or changing television. as much as for a quarter of Americans, they're trying to enhance that experience in some way.
So again, early on, but what are some of the lessons that sports media, especially TV, but also journalists, what can they take from realizing that number of the audience is looking? It's not, because it often feels like, from reading research for me, that it's very much an either or. Like, they're replacing traditional media with new media, but the research you're showing is very augmented, very almost boosting it.
Right. Well, and I think the biggest distinction that sometimes we don't make is the difference between I'm doing this because I want to and I'm doing this because I have to.
Okay.
So, for instance, at ESPN, their term is Optimal Available Screen, or OAS. And what they mean there is, if all the screens are available to you to watch the big game, what screen do you choose? And still 95% of the time, people are saying television. However, that television's not always available, or you don't want to pay for cable, satellite, whatever it is. And so then it becomes, well, I don't want to watch this on my phone, but that is the best option I have available at the given time. So lots of times we act like, well, people prefer to watch baseball on their laptop. What we find is, there's a few people out there like that. But for the most part, it's I need to, because that's the only way I can access the content I want, or the only way I can afford it. And that's different, right? So it's trying to, same thing for binge watching, for instance. People think, people are binge watching because they naturally prefer it. Some people don't. Right. Some people would still prefer to have one episode per week, but ultimately feel like, well, someone's going to spoil it for me if I don't binge watch. So it's the difference between want to and have to that I think is interesting.
That is interesting, yeah. So I wanted to get into the writing panel, the book writing panel that you were a part of on Mondays. I thought you gave some great advice to people like me who've never written a book but have this idea that we might like to write a book someday. And you've written or edited, was it 18?
Yeah.
Books? That's insane, by the way. And so I guess, you had kind of an opening statement at the thing, and so just kind of, what are some of those overall tips so somebody listening to this thinks, yeah, I'd like to write a book one day, academic or popular press or whatever. Like, what do you tell someone when they say, hey, I want to write a book?
Right. Well, the first is, do you want to write a book, or do you want to say you wrote a book?
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Rick Bragg's on our faculty, and he's written a lot of famous books and things like that. And he always says, I hate writing, but I love having written. And that's fine, but getting a sense of, okay, is it because you want to say you're a book author, or is it because the subject demands it?
Okay.
And for me, many times I feel like, okay, the thing is to let the subject truly marinate, breathe, to give it the respect it deserves. Many times you need a book. So the first one I ever did was after I'd done a series of studies on Olympic content. I'm like, but we really need to go into production. We really need to go into effects, and I want these to work in concert with one another. And so it was, okay, I want to interview Bob Costas and Dick Ebersol and those people, find out what their intention is, then look at the content to see what the actuality is, and then look at the effects to see what's going on there.
Right.
And so at least book projects, to me, are ways to let a subject breathe, or to give it the respect, or to look at things through multiple methodologies.
Okay.
Ways that you can't do in a journal article or a series of journal articles.
Right.
Yeah.
I think you had a great phrase about delimiting your topic.
Right.
What is that? And so can you peel that apart, what that meant?
Well, I always, you look at a topic and then you say, what is your persuasive thesis for that? And then you start to work out a table of contents in your brain. At least that's the way I work. And I try and think, okay, if it's 3 or 4 chapters, then it's probably journal articles.
Okay.
Right? If it's 20, that's way too much. But you start to get a sense for, can we look at this topic in 4 or 5 compelling lenses or ways, in a way that's actually palatable to an audience? So you don't want to do something that's so self-indulgent for you, because you, of course, think your topic is great.
Right.
But you can't be like, gosh, I'm going to look at 8 different case studies of the same thing here. Chances are there's a very limited market for that. But if you're looking at things in a different way, or I guess one way I try and phrase it is, if you feel like your thesis is, I find it interesting that, you don't have a book.
Okay.
If you say, I find it interesting because, and then you have a list of reasons, then you've got a book.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also found it helpful you mentioned that books are about 80 to 100,000 words.
Yeah.
And that's really just a good kind of mental model of the scope of how big it has to be. So do you find when you're either coming up with ideas or talking to students or authors, are most topics, do people want to shoot too high or are they shooting too narrow in their topic?
In general, they're probably not seeing all the angles that are necessary there.
Okay.
So they want to do one method and really just focus really hard on that. I would say they're often shooting too broad.
Okay.
Because many times what they'll think they have covered there, they haven't. They need time to really explore that in some way. So, the example for a book that I just have released here was we ultimately looked at gay athletes in American team sports. But we started saying we wanted to do GLBTQ athletes in sport.
Okay.
And in sport media. And then you started to say, well, gosh, to set that up, you've got to set up the difference between the stigmas for gay athletes, which are very different than for lesbian athletes, which are very different than for Caitlyn Jenner. And you're starting to say there's really a whole different sense of stigma, stereotype, and things there. And you start to realize, okay, now how is it different for Greg Louganis in an individual sport as opposed to Jason Collins in a team sport with a whole locker room discussion that people love to have? And so we started delimiting to say, no, we need to look at the team dynamics, and we just need to look at gay men.
Okay.
And we found enough room to let that breathe. We found enough room to say, okay, how do we look at that from the athlete's point of view versus the league versus the media? And you find new ways to untangle that.
That's interesting. So the overly broad topic would basically be gay athletes in sports.
Right.
And then you
think that that's perfect for a book.
Right.
That you, of course, and then you're like, gosh, that's too much.
Yeah.
And then other things you're like, okay, well, I want to look at this. And you're like, well, that, maybe it's, let's say, Kaepernick. I think we're about to have several books on Kaepernick and athlete activism. And that's certainly worthwhile. Chances are you want to go athlete activism unless you really want to get into Kaepernick. And you're going to find he doesn't have that many public statements about it. So your actual rhetoric is being spoken by other people, and that might make that book tough in some way that you didn't anticipate before.
Right, and you get into the issue that you spoke about, too, about other people having written about the same topic and writing about it. So, obviously the topic that you wrote about for your recent book is very well discussed, very well talked about. How do you balance out that, saying something new with that, versus, I'm phrasing this poorly, but kind of how do you balance, like, a lot of people are writing and thinking about this. How do you figure out what you're bringing to the table?
Well, there's a couple ways, all right? So you say, has something changed in recent years that has changed the debate in a noteworthy manner?
Okay.
So is there some timeliness to it? Is there some new significance that has happened, that isn't there before? You can also say, is there a new method or a new way of looking at this? So, a book I've got coming out this fall with Jason Black, who's a rhetorician, and I'm a social scientist, we're going to look at the Native American mascot debate. And if you look, you see, well, there's a half dozen books that all really have done a nice job with that. None of them did it from a social science perspective or had I think we had a 1,200-person survey that informed my side of the book or what I was contributing there. And so our uniqueness was we're going to use empiricism to set up, all right, here's how, forget about right or wrong, figure out what is public sentiment on this. So we said we're going to have that inform case studies. And we're also going to separate out, for us, our big things was to separate out names versus images versus rituals. Okay. Because there's different things that are offensive or not offensive for different people. It might be the name that bothers you, or it might be the tomahawk chop. Okay. Or it might be the image. So there we're like, okay, people have done this 6 times before, but they haven't done it empirically, and they haven't broken it down in 3 ways. And all of a sudden then you've got something that speaks to those books without duplicating it.
Yeah. What's your actual process for kind of peeling that apart? I mean, is it conversations with your co-authors? Is it looking at like how do you kind of tease like I'm really interested in this idea now, how you kind of methodically break it apart into something that's new? Like, what's your process for actually doing that?
Well, I think you start by saying, can I write this on my own, or do I need a co-author? Is there someone who brings something unique to the equation? Quite often, I'll want a co-author because then it's going to do something that isn't just about me, and it's going to challenge me in some manner. So you do that, and then you start to work out a table of contents, and then you start to together. And I've never authored a book with more than one other co-author. I'm not sure how you do it with 3 or 4, but. I guess I have a textbook that did that with Mike Butterworth and Paul Terman. But for the most part, for these scholarly books, you try and get a sense of how does this table of contents break down, and are we each going to take our own chapters or areas? Do we each do parts of chapters that kind of lead in, lead out? You figure out division of labor, and then you try and make sure you're on the same thesis.
Okay.
And that's been an interesting process for me, because lots of times you think you want the best person on the subject, but what you need is a yin to your yang. You need something that counterbalances that. For me, for instance, I did a fantasy sport book. I wanted to look inside the industry. And I was interested in X, but I really wanted someone who was more on that management side. And so Brody Ruley was the example of someone who just finished his dissertation, but it was on fantasy sport, and he had the management side of things. And so we constantly were negotiating, okay, is it good or bad that the fantasy industry is booming? And we go back and forth from a management side, yes. From a communication side, I don't know. I don't know. So, you try and find people that you can have general disagreement but still have a commonality of vision.
Right. I'm wondering, too, a couple things that you said there I want to circle back to, but you mentioned you're writing like the Native American mascot book, is you're writing it from an empirical point of view. And I'm wondering, how do you make in a book form, because in a journal article you expect empirical numbers. Right. How do you make empirical data readable?
Right. You simplify it a great deal. So, I'm not going to run difference tests for the most part, or if I am, I'm simply going to say whether something was statistically different, but not offer P-levels or things like that. You also adapt scales to something that is manageable. So, for instance, with the Native American mascot book, every single thing we had people evaluate was on a 0 to 10 scale, because I think that makes it more, rather than saying, well, this was a 7-point scale, and the fan identity scale has 5 points, and, you don't want any of that. You want 0 to 10. Use 5 as a point of demarcation, and keep that consistent throughout your entire measure. Even if that wouldn't be what you do for a journal, it makes it more palatable for the public, where they could say, oh, that name got a 7, but this one only got a 4.5. They can grasp that.
Okay. And one of the other things I think that you mentioned that was helpful about writing a book was thinking about it from the historical perspective, because the book is not only lasts longer, but it comes out in the future. From my notes from the conference, like if you start writing a book now, you have to think what this subject's going to look like in August 2020, because that's how long the process takes. And I think specifically about like all the Kaepernick stuff that's happening. We're seeing a lot of great research and talk about his story here, but now thinking about what that looks like in 2 years from now. So when you're writing about issues like this, I mean, how does that affect your topic selection, or does it just kind of affect the kind of bigger theme that you take on it?
You've got to be willing to jumpstart, or move the book in a different direction. You also, all right, so there's the time to write the book, and then there's the time it takes to get a book out.
Right.
So, for instance, the Native American mascot book we turned in July of 2017. It'll be out in October of 2018, and the review process actually went pretty smoothly, but that's how long it takes. And you've got 15 months in there where the entire, all of a sudden we could have a Supreme Court ruling that says X, Y, or Z.
Right.
The gay athlete book, all of a sudden, if a famous athlete had come out just while the book was in production, that changes the entire equation.
Yeah.
How does that look? But you've got to be willing to, for instance, with the gay athlete book, we're like, okay, we started to talk about we're going to have this metaphor of, the floodgates opening. The dam is breaking. Because we conceived it in 2013 when we had Jason Collins and Michael Sam and Robbie Rogers in the MLS. And then what?
Nothing. Yeah.
And so then we had to, I think the opening line of the final chapter is, this is not the book we intended to write, or this is not the book we planned to write, because we really thought something was about to happen.
Right. So kind of getting away from writing on that, but why do you think, with that specifically, because I remember that, it did feel like this was, going to be, the dam was going to break, right? And then it hasn't. So why do you think, from your research, and why do you think that hasn't happened yet?
Well, there's a couple things. Some would argue that it has. Some would say, hey, you look, and I think there's going to be 8 openly out college football players this fall, which would be an all-time high. So you're going to get a whole lot more people who are comfortable coming out earlier in their life, and sure enough, if they're good enough, they're going to make it to the NFL, and that's the more likely path. There's also this notion of sometimes an advocate might not be helping.
Okay.
And what I mean there is, a few years ago, for instance, we had Brendan Iambadejo in the NFL had said he knew of 4 pro athletes who were thinking of coming out together as a group to kind of share the brunt of the responsibility. That never happened. All right. Now, some people we interviewed for the book said we don't think those people ever existed. Okay. I don't know if they did or not, but the message, right? So you think that's a very progressive message, but what the message could be to the closeted athlete was 4 people looked at the environment and decided, nope, I'm not coming out.
Right.
And that sends a message of they decided to stay closeted, maybe I should too. So it can impede progress if you try and push that too much in some way.
Interesting. So you've written and edited 18 books, which is insane, as I said earlier. And you talked about this a little bit. So what's your how do you do that? What's your work process is like? I thought you had some really useful tips for work process. Right.
For me, for instance, I know after 2 solid hours of writing, I need to get up, I need to walk the dog, I need to watch a half-hour TV show, whatever it is, just to decompress, get on the treadmill, whatever it is there. But what I really try and do with my job, and I'm fortunate that they offer me that flexibility, is I try to make sure I'm never teaching on Wednesdays. Middle of the week, that's writing day. I certainly could be collecting data elsewhere or whatever it is, but for the most part, you at least have that time where you can kind of map it out and say, I'm going to have 3 or 4 of these 2-hour stints where I can work on things. The other thing, choose co-authors incredibly well and stick to deadlines in some way there. But really for me, one thing that's always been fortunate is because I have the background in public speaking, being on the speech team in college, and then coaching, I was always used to juggling a lot of things. So my final year coaching, we had 120 different events that we were sending out there. They're each 10 minutes long, that you're trying to coach, you're trying to refine, whatever it is. So I was always more comfortable with juggling a lot of different things and knowing which fire needed to be put out now, which could wait till later.
Yeah.
And that's always helped me in terms of being able to write a little bit more quickly or edit myself a little bit better.
But you also said, too, it's important, I think, to find how you work and know how you work.
No, yes. No, I should mention that. Just because that works for me doesn't mean it works for you. If you write better first thing in the morning, go for it. If you're a 2 a.m. person, go for it. So many times people feel like, well, I need to do what Winston Churchill did, which was always, he had I believe it was Scotch. He always had first thing in the morning and then wrote 3 pages and then he went on a walk and whatever it was. And that worked for him.
Right.
That doesn't have to be you. Or I think they were talking about Tom Wolfe, always tried to write 10 pages a day.
Right.
That could be hell for some people.
Right.
Or it could be perfect for your plan. Whatever, if it works, do it. If it doesn't, don't.
Right. So when did you discover that worked for you, or how did you discover that worked for you?
I always discovered, I think during the dissertation process, I think you learn a lot about yourself. I don't know if you had that experience or not. That writing a dissertation on your own for a year or more can either be incredibly liberating or incredibly isolating, and you find yourself in a whole spiral of despair. And for me, it taught me, oh my gosh, if I can just set my own timetable and map out exactly when I'm going to have things done. That was incredibly appealing to me. And if I said, I think for me with the dissertation, it was I'm taking a group of students to Rome, and I want to step on that plane knowing the dissertation's turned in.
Okay.
And so then you have that motivation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you can decide, hey, I'm not going to do anything this week or these couple weeks because I need to decompress.
Okay.
That power is incredibly useful.
Right. And I've talked about this with a couple other people on the show, is that what the power of deadline, obviously, as a former newspaper guy, that's
right.
used, but the deadline has to have some meat to it. Like I can set deadlines for what you want, but you have to. There has to be a deadline has to have a consequence.
Right.
I've found, or else it's just a deadline.
What's always worked for me, this is the way my mind works, is you think of things in terms of finite time or infinite time. Okay. So, for instance, I'll turn around grades for class pretty quickly. Why? Because grading 20 papers takes the same amount of time now that it would take 3 weeks from now. I can either do it now and be applauded for turning it around quickly, or I can spend that same amount of time later and still have people grumbling that it took that long. Mm-hmm. There are other things that aren't that way, right? I mean, if you're like, all right, I can mow the lawn today or I could wait a couple more days. Well, as soon as you mow the lawn,
right,
the timing starts again, right? So now you got to mow it earlier. So there's certain things that don't take up the same amount of time. I can mow the lawn 12 times versus 15 if I don't care that much about having it exactly pristine. That's different than some of these other things. So to me, a deadline is, well, why not hit the deadline, have everyone happy, rather than dealing with all the chaos that's the fallout of you not hitting it.
Right. And now you've given me permission to slack off on mowing the lawn. Fantastic. You mentioned that, and I didn't know this about you, so you just said it, that you have a background in public speaking coaching and public speaking stuff. How does that inform your writing?
I like to think it makes it more accessible.
Okay.
You can ask people who read it whether that works or not. I think because everything had to be, 3 main points, preview, review, summary, all that, internal transitions, whatever it is, that it helped me structure arguments in a way that could be useful there. And it helped me really, once again, we get back to that notion of because rather than that. So I always would try and think of, like one event would be impromptu speaking. And you'd be given a quotation and you'd have 7 minutes combined to prepare and deliver. So you'd have like a minute to prepare and 6 minutes to deliver a speech. You try and think, what's your thesis? And then you think of reasons why you believe that thesis to be the case.
Okay.
Thinking in terms of reasons is very different than it's true in the following instances. Then you're building by example. I don't find that as appealing as thinking, here are 2 or 3 reasons why something is the case.
I never knew. So you'd be given a quote and then have to talk about it for.
Yes,
it's crazy.
Yes. So you're able to map it out on a note card if you want, and I suppose you could take longer than a minute, but you need time to deliver that speech too.
Well, and the idea of structuring it, is a theme I think of what you were talking about at the thing too. And I remember the table of contents being so key, I think, to your planning process. And you saying that was very helpful. Like if you can map out, you map it out by chapter, and that gives
by thousands of words.
Okay.
Not every chapter has to be the same length, and it's that notion of saying, gosh. For the gay athlete book, it was, I want to look at how race plays a role or how religion plays a role. Well, it played a role, but it wasn't as much of a role as the hiding and shielding and trying to pass. So all of a sudden, the hiding and shielding chapter is twice as long as the one that's on identity aspects. And that's okay. But you try and map things out in terms of, how long's this book? All right, let's say it's 90,000 words. And then you try and think, I know the intros, I'm going to have to set up a lot. Let's make that 8. Here, this is going to be interview data, so it's going to be longer. This is going to be quantitative, so it might be a little shorter because numbers don't take a whole lot of time to present.
Right.
You start to get a sense for how this book's going to flow in some manner there. But think of everything in terms of, do you really want to write 4,000 words on framing theory, or do you think 500 could set it up for anyone who's reading this? They might already know.
Right. So I ask this of every guest on the podcast. What's the best thing you've read lately?
Best thing I've read. All right, I'm going to give a weird one here. Usually, I love reading fiction. Mm-hmm. The Tiger Woods biography is fantastic. Armin Katayan and Jeff Benedict, I thought, it's 404 pages. It is comprehensive. Mm-hmm. It is strong, and it's an ability. I think it's a really good example of not giving a person an excuse for how they are or how they behaved, but giving a reason or an explanation. Mm-hmm. And so, that was really a sharp one that I'm encouraging a lot of people to read, to get inside the mind of an elite athlete. Because lots of times we say, well, I wouldn't be this way. Like, take a look at their world. Right. Not justifying it, but just saying you don't know that world.
I've done some research with the sport ethic, which is that kind of that idea. And you realize that they're not, the phrase in that literature is deviant over conformity, which is basically you're so locked into the world of an elite athlete and what it takes to be an elite athlete that it leads you to, performance enhancing drug. It can lead to performance enhancing drugs, stuff that happened with Tiger. And it's just because that's, they're not like you and me and the other people in this hallway. Like, they're a very, very unique subset of a subset.
I mention that because we're talking sports here, and it's a sports book. But one thing I really encourage people to do is not constantly feel like they need to be reading in their discipline or don't. I know we always try and say read for pleasure, blah blah blah. Mm-hmm. That's always incredibly useful for me. Being inspired by a book or. Yeah, I have a whole separate word file of my favorite quotes from books, and all of a sudden, then I'm folding in a quotation from Paul Kalanithe's book, whatever it was. It's a memoir, and all of a sudden I'm dovetailing that into some concept of sports. Or I'm taking something from The Instincts with Meg Wolitzer that's fiction and whatever it is. And you're trying to merge that together because that's really what sports is about, right? It's trying to learn about yourself and learn about your world, how you navigate it in some way. But we're all looking to be inspired. We're all looking to be our better selves. And so I think reading outside of those things really is useful.
I agree too. Like I like to read a lot of, say, crappy fiction, like the James Patterson Bill Clinton book that I put out. I read last year. It's not great, but it's a great decompression. You read a lot of serious stuff when you're in our world, so it's nice to have that not serious thing. But there's also something like, wow, they really propel they have characters and really propel a narrative through something like that, and that's something you can take from. Even something like that. From
books or film or television shows or whatever. For me, I still remember I've used it before in a book, I think, from the movie Memento. And they're like, memory can change the shape of a room. It can change the color of a car. Mm-hmm. And I love that notion from that movie. And then you start applying it to sports media. And how does your memory change the way you receive that in some way? And how faulty is our memory with the way we thought that unfolded versus how it actually unfolded.
Interesting, yeah. Well, Andy, this has been great. I know you're a busy man at the conference, so I appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely enjoyed it.
As always, thanks for listening to The Other 51. You can find show notes for this episode and all our episodes at sportsmediaguy.com on the Other 51 tab. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. I can highly recommend Overcast for this. Our theme music is by Ellie Moritz.